Welcome to the informational overview for the Safe and Together Model Advocacy Institute. This is David Mandel, and I will be providing you a brief informational session on the 2017 Safe and Together Model Advocacy Institute, which is the 5th Advocacy Institute we've done over the last few years. We've found them really helpful tools for domestic violence advocates who are working as a co-located advocate with child welfare, and also for advocates who are heavily involved with a caseload where their clients are involved with child welfare. And I'll be talking to you about the Safe and Together Institute, about the Advocacy Institute itself, who it's for, some of the activities involved, the timeline for application, cost, and anything that you might need to make a decision about applying for the 2017 Institute. The organization that is hosting it is the Safe and Together Institute, and we're formally David Mandel and Associates, and we've changed our name recently to really represent the continuing collaboration that is the focus of our work and the global nature of our work. And we see the Advocacy Institute as a critical part of this. We're working with advocates in the U.S., women's sector workers in Australia, United Kingdom, and other places, and we're really seeing that work with the advocates as really a critical part of this global network of domestic violence-informed child welfare professionals, communities, and systems that we're really trying to cultivate with the Safe and Together model and related concepts and tools. The Safe and Together Institute is really dedicated to advancing inquiry, knowledge, practice, and collaboration using a perpetrator pattern-based approach to the intersection of domestic violence and children. And as we talk about the Advocacy Institute model, we'll really be talking about how advocates can utilize a perpetrator pattern-based approach and practice tools like pivoting to really change the way they collaborate with child welfare, getting child welfare to shift their focus away from a failure to protect approach where domestic violence survivors are being blamed and held responsible for the behaviors of the perpetrator, and really shifting that work, the focus of child welfare, through the use of this approach to make them more focused on perpetrators being responsible as parents for the harm they're doing to child and family functioning. And within that, we're also dedicated, again, to this creating a network of folks. And as we evolve the Safe and Together Institute model, we're doing things like inviting in guest blog posts and other voices, doing more evaluation work, really looking to increase connections across sites. And so one of the values of this National Safe and Together Advocacy Institute, which is what this really is that advocates may be meeting with, or likely meeting with advocates from other jurisdictions, other states, maybe even other countries, depending on what's going on. And so there will be this creation of a community of practice that's part of this aspect of the Advocacy Institute. And at the Safe and Together Institute, we offer a range of things from organizational assessment, which is something we do with primarily with child welfare, but we can do with other organizations where we look at policy, practice, training, services, and really help them move towards becoming more domestic violence informed, to our core 4-day and advanced practice trainings, to the mapping tools, some of which will be part of the Advocacy Institute, to training domestic violence specialists and certified trainers. And part of the work that we do is this more advanced specialist training that really helps folks really work with within a child welfare setting to really do consultation. And this is one of the things that Safe and Together Advocacy Institute advocates can really pull out of this, is be able to do better case consultation. As we've moved around the country and worked with a number of different co-located advocates in a number of different states, what we're finding is that many of them are tasked with not only being a liaison between child welfare and their domestic violence agency, but also that they've got a role of consultation. And we find that the Safe and Together Advocacy Institute really helps them prepare to consult on cases in a way that really pivots child welfare's focus away from the survivor to the perpetrator, and really can help child welfare be a much better partner in support to domestic violence survivors, adult and child survivors. So this specialist approach is really built into the Advocacy Institute. We provide a 2-year certification out of this, and then there's a chance for recertification that comes at the end of this. And part of our work, we do data and research development, and we'll be launching online courses, which can be relevant to any jurisdiction or any place that's looking to do co-located advocates, because those courses can really help child welfare come on board with a domestic violence-informed approach. Built into the Safe and Together Model Advocacy Institute will be some evaluations. So for those of you who are looking to talk to funders and explain to them what they might be getting out of it, we will be providing you back with, built into the cost of this is some follow-up with the advocates who participate in the Advocacy Institute to really find out how this is impacting their practice. So we'll be able to provide you back something that you can show to your funders really about the impact of the work, the participation in the model on the work. For those of you who are not familiar with the Safe and Together model, the name really comes from this idea that working to keep children safe and together with the non-offending parent, the domestic violence survivor, usually the mom, is the most efficient, effective, and best thing for the children. And this map gives you a sense of where we've been active in the U.S. and abroad in 2016 alone. And in the U.S., all the work that you're seeing in the left is at the jurisdictional level, working at the state level in Iowa with advocates and child welfare and community partners to create specialist teams to provide consultation. District of Columbia working to oversee how the whole system can become more domestic violence informed. Ohio is one of our longest standing state projects. We're working with differential response to really improve the response to child welfare across the entire state. Florida, we work closely with DCF and the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And many of these jurisdictions, we're working closely both with child welfare and domestic violence coalitions or agencies. And Florida was the first place we did an advocacy institute along with the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And so that kind of runs out, throughout the states, where New York is another place where we did a statewide advocacy institute. We work with around 30 advocates and their supervisors to do the 6-month process with them as well. So as you look across the map and the globe, without going into too much detail, in all these places we're working with either statutory child welfare, we're working with NGOs that are child-centered, we're working with women's sector workers, or we're doing research, and the model has traveled really well, including to Asia and Australia. Again, for those of you who might not be familiar with the model, it's built on these 3 practice principles, and it's really a set of principles, concepts, and practice tools that really tie together practice in communities, between professionals, within disciplines, to really help them improve the way we all respond to cases with domestic violence and children. And so the first item at the top of the list is how we work to keep kids safe and together with that domestic violence survivor, and focus on the needs of the kids around physical and emotional safety, healing from trauma, and providing stability and nurturance. And in the Advocacy Institute, we'll be talking to advocates around how we really address gender double standards that penalize mothers and really often embolden fathers who are abusive, and really to make sure that adult survivors are being given full credit for their efforts to promote safety, healing from trauma, and stability and nurturance. And particularly around stability and nurturance, we emphasize how important it is for advocates to communicate to child welfare all the things a survivor may be doing day to day to keep the kids on track, keep them going to school, keep them focused on a regular routine. And these things are often ignored in conversations cross-discipline and even within advocacy, because they're just what mothers are expected to do. And so the model really helps move that forward, advances ways to practice with survivors where it helps them identify their strengths as a parent and really give them the choice about what they're going to share with child welfare if they're involved with that system. The second main principle, again, geared towards child welfare systems and others, is how do we partner with that non-offending parent as the default position for child-centered decision-making? With this idea that, again, if we're strength-based and we can identify what the survivor is doing that is good around the parenting, good around what she's doing to maintain the kids, good around what she's doing to promote the overall family functioning, that when systems are better identifying those strengths, they're better at validating what she's doing to her, working collaboratively with her, partnering with her, and that from a child welfare point of view, that's the most efficient and effective way to approach these families. And so in the Advocacy Institute, advocates will really learn the language and the approach to really, in some ways, speak child welfare, and really to think about how do you bring down the conversation to the bottom line of child safety and explain why partnering isn't just good advocacy work, but it's good child welfare work and what that really looks like. And so the Safe and Together principle here has really been very useful for both advocates and for child welfare. And then the third principle is how do we really address interventions with perpetrators to reduce risk and harm to kids around engagement, accountability in courts. In the context of the Advocacy Institute, the understanding is that advocates are not engaging perpetrators directly, but that in their role as advocates, they can play a critical role with child welfare, helping them focus their interventions on the perpetrator versus the survivor. And for many of us, we're familiar with child welfare getting involved because a domestic violence perpetrator makes a choice to be violent. And what happens is the case gets opened up on the domestic violence survivor. And so when we talk about systems advocacy or even advocacy for individual women, one of the questions really that advocates can be asking child welfare is, what's your plan with him? What kind of interventions have you done with him? How are you working with him to make sure the kids are safe? Because when there's not that awareness and the visibility of the perpetrator, then all the casework, all the planning, good or bad, is focused on the adult survivor. And so when we talk about this work, we're shifting case practice, where instead of there being a list of 8 things for the survivor to do and nothing for the perpetrator, that actually in many cases that we've worked on, you end up with a longer list of expectations of the perpetrator and less expectations from child welfare for the domestic violence survivor. And these are the things that we've seen played out over and over again and that really feel very, very important for survivors, that advocates can really help child welfare pivot from the focus on often a failure to protect approach to domestic violence survivors and really pivot towards how they really intervene with, engage with in a child-centered, safe way around the domestic violence perpetrator. And this is really a critical skill that we teach advocates as part of the Advocacy Institute, both with pivoting as a practice tool and mapping perpetrators' patterns, which is another specific tool that advocates will get out of this process as well. And so when you look at this, again, for those of you who might be familiar with the model, you've seen this before, but those of you who aren't, that those model characteristics, those principles, the critical components, they get tied together, and we're shooting for better outcomes for families and systems. And what we found, for instance, is in Ohio, where they did third-party evaluation of the Safe and Together model, it reduced blame from child welfare of domestic violence victims staying in a relationship, for instance. And so what you can believe that translates into is better partnership and other practices that would be different going on around this. We've also found that the model has also been associated with a 50% reduction in the out-of-home placement of kids in cases where domestic violence is present in a child welfare caseload. That's a tremendous number, and we feel particularly proud of that, and that's been identified in 2 different jurisdictions in Florida, as the Safe and Together model was a critical part of interventions in 2 distinct regions at 2 different points in time, part of different collaborations with Florida Coalition, local domestic violence agencies, with the Safe and Together model being the large framework for really that process. And so we're really happy to see a huge drop in out-of-home placements without any increased available identification of increased maltreatment, at least one of the jurisdictions. So really want to help people understand that this is a model that really has been correlated with change in practice, change in outcomes, more kids staying in the home with domestic violence survivors safely, and really in that way is extremely consistent with the goals and objectives of advocate work in the U.S. and abroad. So one more piece of the larger model and approach, without going all the way in depth with it, is that we're really looking to help advocates move systems to become domestic violence informed, competent and proficient, and move away from domestic violence destructive practice or domestic violence neglectful practice, and really shift from the red over to the light purple here. And just to make it clear, when we're talking about domestic violence destructive practice, it's what many of us are familiar with, is this idea that, for instance, victims need to get restraining orders or injunctions or orders of protection in order to keep their kids or minimize child welfare's involvement. And when that's done without regard to the perpetrator's pattern of behavior, without regard to whether it actually will make things worse or better for this particular survivor in her socioeconomic situation, really what we find is often domestic violence destructive, which is systems behavior that pushes survivors further away from help or actually increases their danger. And when we look at that combined with domestic violence neglectful practice, which is defined by sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, so there's no specific evaluation or no unique assessment around domestic violence issues or no unique understanding of survivor strengths in domestic violence cases. When you have those things in practice, they predominate in a system, you have kids taken unnecessarily, you have adult survivors blamed for perpetrators' behavior. More often than not, this falls on poor women, women of color. It often can be very destructive to women in same-sex relationships. And so what we want to do is move systems, and we give advocates the tools to help move their systems to more domestic violence competent, where the system is better at identifying the perpetrator's responsibility for impacting child and family functioning and seeing them as being responsible, not the survivor. It really helps being more strength-based and gives survivors the chance to shine really within the system, whether it's directly through the support of their advocates or by where the advocate really works with the system, to really be strength-based, identify what the mother's doing right. And that can really have a profound impact on the way a case proceeds, or even whether it's opened or not by a system. I'm thinking about one of the jurisdictions where child welfare really absorbed the lesson of domestic violence informed practice and sat down with a mom in the context of the case and started the conversation with, we want to let you know that we see him as being 100% responsible for the violence impact on the family. We want to tell you all the things we see you've done right as a parent. And what the child welfare worker came back to us and said is that not only did the mom's shoulders go down as a sign of relaxing, but her attorney's shoulders went down and made the case conference go much more smoothly and much more effectively from both parties' perspectives. And so when we shift to domestic violence competent practice, we start seeing a greater injection of an identification of the survivor's strengths. What's she doing day to day to keep the kids safe? And that really brought into the practice. And so we want to see systems moved in this direction as part of the result of participation in the Advocacy Institute. And so that's kind of a larger framework, and to move more specifically into the Advocacy Institute and its history and some of the particulars related to it. It was designed to help advocates work more effectively with child welfare-involved survivors, which is becoming a greater and greater portion of many agencies' caseload and who they're working with, and to help child advocates work more effectively with child welfare itself. And co-located advocates are becoming a bigger part of many states or many agencies' range of advocates and where they're located. And for instance, Florida has done tremendous work. Florida Coalition has done tremendous work to put co-located advocates in every jurisdiction in the state. And there's a lot of states that we work with: Oregon, New York State, Delaware, New Jersey, just to name a few, that have very developed, South Carolina, very developed statewide co-located or domestic violence liaison initiatives. And so this was really designed to provide those advocates with more skills and more abilities to really move systems and advocate for their clients who might be involved with child welfare. The first Advocacy Institute, like I said earlier, was with the Florida Coalition, sponsored by them, using our model. It was really done in collaboration, and we've had a long-standing collaboration with the Florida Coalition and continue to work with their advocates, and this was done in around 2014. And since then, we've done 3 more advocacy institutes, one for New York State, where we did 15 counties basically, and we invited advocates and their supervisors. So they came in teams of 2 usually, and we worked with all those counties to really improve their ability to work with child welfare. That's being followed up in year 2 of that particular project with a collaboration institute that's going to bring together those advocates in child welfare to really further domestic violence informed practice in those counties. We did a virtual, and we're currently actually doing a virtual advocacy institute, which is being done online, which involves advocates from the U.S. and abroad, meeting on a regular basis to really implement the practice ideas behind this. And then over a year ago, we did a National Advocacy Institute, similar to the one that we're about to launch in 2017, where advocates from 5 different states came and worked together and sat together and learned together, and then went back to their own states and really started advancing this model. And I still remember I participated in some of those, and I remember one of the advocates in the closing for the last National Advocacy Institute talk about how she was so grateful that the Advocacy Institute had given her language to collaborate with this attorney because she felt like that had actually saved the life of this particular woman, that ability to use the language from the Advocacy Institute to increase her collaboration. And for the Advocacy Institute, we're drawing deeply on years of work with advocates in the U.S. and abroad. You know, my base, the foundation, is working with well-known national advocates here in the U.S., going back all the way to having training with Susan Schechter, with Jill Davies. And so the Safer Together model is really deeply ingrained in the advocacy tradition in the U.S. and really comes out of a very strong violence against women prevention framework. So this is really where we're coming back to, and in some ways this is coming back to my roots and the roots of the work that we've been doing, and I feel really good about supporting advocates in their work with mothers and their kids. The goals of the Advocacy Institute are to strengthen individual advocacy with child welfare involved clients. So this really gives increased the ability of advocates to really talk to survivors, help them navigate the system, help the advocates who go through the Institute understand how child welfare makes their decisions, what drives their decisions, what information can help them do a better job supporting the survivor, working with the survivor to identify strengths. We had one example coming out of one of the earlier advocacy institutes where one of the advocates had trained one of her colleagues in the approach, and that colleague had run a group for women involved with child welfare. And those women in the first session were really quite depressed and sad, upset, angry about being there. And the first check-in they did was really challenging in many ways. And the facilitator, again, who had contact through her colleague around the model, said, okay, we're going to do another check-in session. And want to ask you now what you think about your partner as a parent. What is the perpetrator of the violence? What kind of parent is he? And that's that pivoting, and it's pivoting applying to direct work with survivors, and that pivot to the perpetrator as a parent by bringing him into the room, as Kathy Humphrey says, absent presence, bringing him into the room, from what we understood, really shifted the mood of that group and shifted the way the women were talking, how they saw themselves, and was a tremendous intervention. And so pivoting, mapping perpetrators' patterns, other things can really help advocates really strengthen their advocacy work with the clients directly and how they work with child welfare around their clients' needs. In this way and in other ways, it improves cross-systems collaboration. And one of the things that's going to be required of the advocates is a number of requirements for them to successfully complete the institute and be certified, is that they've got to do training to not only their peers, but to child welfare in their community. And with that, really hoping to improve collaboration. And they walk away from the Advocacy Institute with modules that they can do from the Safer Together model with their peers with child welfare, with other agencies to really help them do wholesale, what we think about wholesale consultation and training, really do groups of people at one time. For those advocates who are co-located, because this Advocacy Institute is both for co-located advocates and regular advocates who just have a child welfare involved caseload, help them really develop their consultation skills, how they talk to child welfare in a way that pushes the focus on the perpetrator and keeps child welfare focused on survivor strengths and partnering with her, even when she may be doing substances or have mental health issues. And then really it's an opportunity for professional leadership and development. It really gives a chance for the advocates involved to really grow as professionals and really become stronger leaders in their agency and in their communities. The target audience is broad within the advocacy community. It's those co-located advocates or domestic violence liaisons. It's advocates who may be shelter workers, who may be court workers, but are working with child welfare involved clients, and that's a part of their caseload. Any supervisors who are working with either of those first two groups, what we find is that when supervisors learn this, they're able to more effectively support their advocates. So we really invite strongly supervisors, agency leadership, whether it's managers or executive directors. We've had some of those involved because it can really help those folks shift the way their agency is looking at these issues. And obviously state domestic violence coalition staff are welcome to attend because that gives them a greater sense of what might be possible in terms of their statewide policy issues and initiatives. The Advocacy Institute is an application required. It's a competitive application process that's required to join. So it's not an automatic application. You have to apply. By the end of the webinar, I'll go through the timeline and the dates, but there's an application up on the website, endingviolence.com, and it needs to come along with a letter of support from the executive director. And this is important because it is time away from the office. We know that shelter staff and agency staff is often very stretched very thin. Their resources are tight, and so we're really trying to do this in a way that we know people who come will actually be able to attend and succeed at doing it. If people want to strengthen their application, a letter from local child welfare always is a nice bonus because it lets us see that you're not going to have trouble going and doing training, which is required, and even just because it's a few hours of training, we just want to make sure there's support for those folks, and that will actually strengthen application. We do a pre-institute test. It's a short online test that lets us measure learning before and after. It's part of the evaluation process, so people need to complete both that pre- and post-institute test, and you'll see that the tests require 80% or higher in terms of the post-institute test in order to be certified. It's required to have face-to-face attendance to all 6 days of the face-to-face attendance. I'll give those dates, but the Advocacy Institute starts with 3 days face-to-face that builds community, provides direct learning, helps us set up the coaching groups, and then ends with 3 days of face-to-face in-person live training that really lets us continue with the learning, share what's been learned with each other, and help folks plan for the future. Everybody's got to complete an individual action plan because we want those 4 intervening months. So, between January and June, why is it spread out like this? Well, we know that practice change takes time. We want to give people a chance to practice and reflect on their practice. And so we want people to go into that period when they're back home with a specific idea of what am I going to do? What am I going to try? And we support that with individual coaching session partway through that period. Participants are required to produce a 500-word journal where they get to reflect on their experiences. Again, we find this incredibly useful for the coaching, and participants have really found this being particularly useful to reflect on their practice. And the things we've learned through those journal entries is really that folks really are working so hard and are really finding huge successes as they really kind of move through systems. But it also lets us identify places where people are getting stuck, and we can support them. One of the other requirements is to participate in 2 hours a month video group coaching, and this is how we keep the Institute alive while people are back in their jurisdictions. And so folks will need to have a video capacity, link up, they'll use our Adobe Connect platform, and they'll be meeting with their peers, a group of 6 to 8 of their peers, and a coach, a Safer Together Institute coach, who will talk to them, answer questions, provide guidance, walk them through new training material. And so these coaching sessions are required and part of the in-between work that's done between the face-to-face, the live sessions. And then finally, they're expected to, applicants are expected to, or participants are expected to deliver 5 one-hour training modules, curricula that we will provide them that will let them train their peers, train child welfare, and another outside agency. It could be a family services agency or court personnel. But the idea behind making this part of the required activities is, is the idea that in training you learn. By having to explain the model, having to explain the approach to others, that embeds the learning more in the participant. So it's really a transfer of knowledge activity, but it also is designed to really help support the participants in their work in advancing domestic violence informed practice. So for instance, we know that in many agencies, co-located advocates are not understood by their peers. And so by providing training into their agency peers, this can really provide some support for the co-located advocates themselves. By doing work with child welfare can really increase the ability of a co-located advocate to really be more successful in their work with child welfare. What we have here is an overview of the curriculum topics for the Advocacy Institute. What's covered in the live sessions, what's covered in any additional reading that happens, and the practice. And so what you have here is that we provide an overview of the model, the safety of the model, and its principles, its core components, its multiple pathways to harm framework, what it means to be survivor strength-based. We work with advocates around applying a perpetrator pattern-based approach to advocacy. And what we find is this mapping perpetrator pattern tool that we use really can help advocates work with child welfare in an objective way that child welfare really begins to shift its work towards perpetrators and really contextualize what victims' decision-making is doing for kids and for family functioning. And we find an incredibly effective tool that's worked in the U.S. abroad. We're doing case consultations right now with Australian child welfare using this tool, and they find it a tremendous resource. And we want to put it in the hands of advocates so they can really enhance their systems-based advocacy. Similarly, we'll be training on our mapping survivor parenting strength tool, protective capacity tool, and that tool really helps advocates. Will help advocates really work with child welfare, identify all the things survivors are doing right in terms of parenting. And what we find is that when child welfare can see how she's actively trying to keep the kid safe, that their partnerships with the survivor usually strengthen. We'll teach pivoting as a practice tool, which is a consultation-based skill to be used in meetings, to be used in case consultation, which is really to help change conversations. You know, many of us are faced with conversations that start with, well, she keeps going back to him, or she keeps making poor choices, she's picking him over the kids. And so pivoting as a practice tool really can help us shift those conversations to really focus more on the perpetrator. It's a systematic way to do that. Again, we've worked with over and over again. It's really seen results in different jurisdictions. We'll help advocates really better understand what kind of challenges and tools and strengths and issues that child welfare brings to the issue of domestic violence. And oftentimes advocates are frustrated by not understanding the system. And so what this piece of the curriculum will really help advocates understand what matters to child welfare in their choices, what barriers do they face, how can you help them overcome their barriers as part of your advocacy work so they're actually better supports to survivors. Curriculum obviously include action planning with them for what they're going to do, and also support them in their training skills in terms of implementing those curriculum modules. Action planning, I want to give an example of some of the action plan steps that folks had come up with before as part of previous institutes. And you see here that they'll feel support to reach out to identify a contact person or focus more on survivor strengths in their work. Working with their peers, this was identified as something they would do as part of that 4-month period on the ground in their offices. And then, and really, how do you promote partnering? This one advocate said, I'm going to go in my meetings with child welfare, as I participate in these case meetings, I'll promote better partnering on the part of child welfare with domestic violence survivors. So what does the institute cost? And that's obviously a big question. What you see here actually is that in the past it cost $2,500, and actually the new reduced cost is $1,900 per person, and actually that's a drop for this institute. We're going to see how it goes. So for those of you watching, I apologize, for some reason the strikeout line for the $2,500 didn't happen. So it's $1,900 per person, which covers all the evaluation, the pre and post testing, the live training, the coaching, all those things. It does not include the travel expenses. So if you're driving to Stamford, Connecticut, it would be that you're on your own for those costs, or flying in. We've had people flying from all over the country. And we've negotiated a room rate of $149, so if you're going to stay for 3 nights, we've kind of put together, for each session, we put together an estimated budget, $2,800 to $3,000 is what people could expect it would cost, excluding transportation, to the 2 live sessions. And so I hope this gives people an idea of what the cost is and how this might fit in with their budget. At the end of this, they'll get a certification where they can identify themselves as Safe and Together model advocates, and that's good for 2 years, and there'll be a minimal recertification fee with some additional I don't say expectations, but so they may need to sort of submit continuing work or some other thing to sort of be in good standing, and we'll kind of share that with them more when they're there, but it will be really easy for them to meet. And then also included is the evaluation activities, where our pre and post test of the advocates who go through it, and then surveying them on practice change. And so this kind of stuff will be part of what we can identify as the core of the evaluation. There may be some other evaluation activities that we're able to put in place before then, but we will provide you with a report on the entire group. We won't be able to provide you with individual practice change reports, but we can give you something you can show to funders and really share that might help explain why this was beneficial for your advocate or advocates to participate. And just to let you know, we've had entire groups of saying advocate or advocates. We've had entire groups of advocates come from different jurisdictions, and it's something powerful if you're listening from a state where you've got 3 statewide advocates or 6, or you've got an agency that's got a few. Sending a group of people can be tremendously beneficial. It can really move forward the conversation and create a mini community of practice in many ways in your area. So we'd encourage you to think about doing that. And this is what we've had some of the advocates saying in the past about how it helped. This one advocate said she came back in and she was so pumped to really work with the child protection investigators, which is CPIs, to really kind of talk to them. And so she felt her confidence level went up, and so we find advocates, their confidence level goes up along with their skills. And so you can see that it really helped this other advocate with her direct work with a child welfare involved client and really identifying their strengths as a parent. And we've had advocates say in the past that they've gotten a lot of support and training around identifying survivors' needs and then case managing those needs. And advocates everywhere are doing this tremendous work for women and their kids. But we've gotten feedback from other advocates saying, well, I really wasn't trained to see what she was doing right as a parent and identify those things that help her talk to child welfare around that. So you see this is really built into the model, and it's really helped advocates in different places. And so what you find is that their conversations with the survivors are changing, their conversations with child welfare is changing, and that they're really they're feeling like they're moving forward in their practice, and we feel really particularly proud about that happening. So what's the timeline for this? The timeline for this is the application is due December 9th, and you want to send those applications to kylepinto@endingviolence.com. If you go to endingviolence.com to our main page and click on the link in the rotator for the Advocacy Institute, it takes you to an informational page that has the Apply Now button, and so you can apply that way. If somehow you've got questions that aren't being answered there, you can write Kyle about that. We will turn around those applications in 1 week, and we'll notify people by December 16th because we know that folks need to make travel plans, and the holidays will be upon us at that point. And then the first live session is January 24th to 26th, 2017 in Stamford, Connecticut, the Stamford Marriott. Full payment is required before the first live session. If somehow that doesn't fit with your budgeting or your approach, you'll need to contact us and we'll be able to negotiate something with you. If you want to start but you can't pay all of it at that point, we'll work out a payment plan or a time frame in terms of that, and that shouldn't be a problem. The 4 coaching sessions will happen between January and June, and then June 13th is the closing live session, 3 days, and that will be the wrap-up. We understand that folks may be struggling at times to complete all the training requirements, other things, and so they'll have until June 30th, the end of that month, to kind of finish everything so we can do our certifications in a timely manner. I will be involved, with some of the live sessions. I will be managing it. The direct project manager will be Kyle Pinto. We've got 2 of our faculty lined up to be also on staff and doing the coaching groups. Those both have extensive experience with case consultation, working with advocates, working as advocates, and really working within the Safe and Together model. So we're real excited about the staff that we've got for this. And so this wraps up this informational session. I hope it was useful for you. If you want more information about the model, the approach, you can go to safeandtogetherinstitute.com or endingviolence.com. Both will get you to the same place. You can check out our YouTube channels if you want more information about the work we're doing. And also, we'll be having online courses coming after the first of the year, pretty soon after the first of the year. And those will be a tremendous resource to really support advocates because it's something that might be available to other members of their community to really strengthen their familiarity with the Safe and Together model. And so these are some of the additional resources that are out there. I hope that this was useful. If you want to reach out to us, again, Kyle Pinto at endingviolence.com is the best address to use. This is website, Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel. And we look forward to hearing from folks. If there are questions that you have after you watch this webinar, please contact us, and we look forward to seeing your application in the near future.